The candlelight caught my husband's hand resting on another woman's wrist, and I felt my whole chest go still. I didn't gasp. I didn't drop my purse. I stood in the doorway of Roosters in a navy dress I'd pressed twice that morning, and I watched the three people I loved most in this world laugh together at a table I wasn't invited to. My name is Tamika Price, and 3 days ago, I turned 65. I'd asked my stepdaughter Jasmine first. Dinner, just us. Nothing fancy. She said work was slammed. Maybe next month. I asked my husband Marlon that same evening, and he said he had a commitment he couldn't move. I told myself 65 didn't need a production. I made a reservation for one at the restaurant where Marlon and I had celebrated 11 anniversaries because I refused to let disappointment cancel out my own life. I want to ask, if you're watching this, tell me where you're tuning in from tonight. I read every single comment. The hostess offered to seat me near the window. I told her I'd prefer my usual corner, the one Marlon and I always requested. She smiled and said, of course, right this way. And that's when I saw them. Corner table, candlelight. Jasmine laughing at something the woman across from her said. Marlon's hand resting easy on the table, like a man with nothing to hide, next to a woman I recognized from photographs I'd only ever seen buried in an old shoebox. Carla, Jasmine's mother, Marlon's ex-wife. 31 years of marriage doesn't disappear in 4 seconds, but recognition can still arrive that fast. This wasn't new. This was simply the first time I was allowed to see it. I didn't make a scene. I asked the hostess to seat me at my own table instead, 3 feet from theirs, and I ordered a glass of champagne like I'd planned to be there all along. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't crack. 31 years of showing up doesn't disappear because you're finally angry. It just, for once, gets permission to speak. When the glass arrived, I stood. I raised it high enough for the whole room to notice, and I smiled. Not the performance of a smile, the real thing. The kind that only comes when a door finally, mercifully, closes. I just want to thank my husband, I said, loud enough for every table near us to go quiet. His ex-wife and my stepdaughter. For finally showing me, on the one night I asked for nothing but their company, exactly where I stand. Nobody moved. Marlon's face drained of color. Carla's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Jasmine looked at me like she'd swallowed glass. I didn't wait for a response. I walked to their table, set my glass down beside my husband's plate, slid the ring off my finger, and placed it next to his silverware. Then I turned and walked out, my heels the only sound in a restaurant that had gone completely silent behind me. Marlon caught me in the parking lot before I reached my car, breathless, already talking. Tamika, wait. It's not what it looked like. We were planning something, a surprise, for your birthday. It went wrong tonight. That's all it was. I looked at him for a long moment. 31 years. And I could still read every lie he'd ever told me in the way his eyes moved too fast. I didn't argue. I didn't call him a liar to his face. I got in my car, started the engine, and drove home in silence, already knowing that whatever he thought he'd just gotten away with wasn't over. Not even close. The house was too quiet for a marriage that had just cracked open. I sat at my kitchen table, still in my navy dress, my heels kicked off by the door, listening to Marlon move around upstairs like a man trying not to be heard. Every few minutes his phone buzzed on the counter beside me, and every time he'd appear in the doorway, glance at it, and walk away without touching it. 3 times. 3 times he let it ring itself out instead of picking it up in front of me. I called Bernice a little after 10. "You sound like you're underwater," she said. No hello, just straight to it. 30 years of friendship earns you that. I told her everything. The empty seat where Jasmine should have sat, the corner table, Carla's face, The ring on his plate. Bernice went quiet in a way that told me she was holding something back. "You've noticed things before," I said. "Haven't you?" "Tamika." "Say it." She sighed. "Remember the anniversary trip 2 years back? Hilton Head, the one he canceled the week of, said work called him out of town?" I remembered. I remembered standing in my closet with a suitcase half packed. Remembered him apologizing so quickly it barely counted as an apology at all. "I ran into him that Saturday," Bernice said, "at the Harris Teeter on Providence Road. Man wasn't traveling anywhere. Told me he was handling some old business. I didn't think much of it then. I'm thinking about it now." I didn't say anything for a long moment. Some part of me had known that trip was a lie the day it happened. I just decided, at the time, that believing him was easier than being right. "There's more," Bernice said carefully. "Those calls he used to take on the back porch. You remember? Always stepped outside, always came back in, acting like nothing happened. I remembered those too. I'd asked him once, years ago, who he talked to out there so late. He'd said work. I'd let it go. The way you let go of 100 small things because pulling on any one thread feels like it might unravel everything you've built. "I have to go," I told her. "I need to think." Upstairs, Marlon had already retreated to the guest room. His choice, not mine. Though I hadn't asked him to leave our bed. I stood outside the door for a moment and heard him on the phone, voice low, saying the same 4 words I'd already memorized. It was a surprise. Whoever was on the other end of that call was getting the exact story I'd gotten in the parking lot, word for word, like he'd rehearsed it before he ever said it to me. A man telling the truth doesn't need to practice it. I walked past our bedroom, my bedroom now, apparently, and into the hallway, past his dresser, the one he never let me organize because he liked his own system of clutter. That's when I saw it. Half tucked beneath his watchbox, corner sticking out just enough to catch the hallway light. An envelope, official looking, with a return address I didn't recognize and hadn't seen arrive in our mail before. I didn't touch it. Not yet. I stood there a long moment, staring at that thin edge of paper poking out from under his things. And for the first time all night, my humiliation cooled into something quieter, something sharper. I was going to find out exactly what that envelope was. I waited until Marlon left for work before I touched it. He kissed my forehead that morning like nothing had happened. Like there wasn't a ring sitting in a drawer somewhere instead of on my finger. Like I hadn't spent the night replaying every small lie he'd ever told me. I let him kiss me. I even said, "Have a good day." A woman gathering proof doesn't announce herself before she's ready. The second his car cleared the driveway, I sat down at the kitchen table with my coffee and didn't move for a while. I hadn't slept much. My chest still carried the same tightness it had carried since the restaurant, and some tired part of me just wanted to sit in my own kitchen and be nobody's wife, nobody's investigator, just a woman drinking coffee in the quiet. I let myself have that for a few minutes before I stood up and went to that dresser. The envelope was still there, tucked under his watchbox, exactly where I'd left it. And my hands weren't as steady as I wanted them to be when I finally slid it free. The return address read a name I didn't recognize, Wendell Hargrove, Plan Administration Services, with an official-looking seal in the corner that made my stomach tighten before I'd even opened it. Inside was a single sheet. Retirement account recertification notice. My eyes moved fast, catching pieces. Beneficiary designation, action required, deadline. And then I found it. The line that made the room go very still around me. A date, 10 days from now, 3 days after my own birthday. I read it twice to be sure I wasn't imagining the timing. I photographed the letter with my phone, front and back, then slid it into the exact same fold it had been in. tucked it back beneath the watch box at the same angle, same depth, so nothing would look disturbed. That evening, I asked him about it over dinner, careful to sound like idle curiosity instead of the truth. Got any mail this week? Something official looking? Marlon's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Half a second, maybe less. Long enough. Just some retirement paperwork, he said, not looking up. Nothing important. Work sends that stuff every year. Every year? I repeated. Yeah. He finally met my eyes, and his smile arrived a beat too late to be real. You know how HR is. Forms for forms. Who's Wendell Hargrove? His fork actually stopped that time. Where'd you... He caught himself, cleared his throat. Guy from the plan office, handles the paperwork. Why? No reason, I said, and took a sip of my water like the question had cost me nothing. He didn't ask how I knew the name. That, more than anything he said, told me something. A man with nothing to hide asks how you know things. A man protecting something changes the subject. He changed the subject. We finished dinner talking about Jasmine's job, about a leak in the garage, about nothing that mattered. And the entire time I sat there thinking about a deadline that fell 3 days after my 65th birthday, wondering exactly what kind of coincidence required that particular calendar. I didn't ask him anything else that night. I'd learned enough for one day. That the envelope was real. That the man's name meant something to my husband, even if he wanted it to sound like nothing. And that whatever this paperwork actually was, it wasn't the kind of form you forget to mention to your wife of 31 years. I went to bed early, phone tucked under my pillow. That photograph of the letter sitting in my camera roll like a small cold stone. Tomorrow, I'd need more than a photograph. I'd need someone who could tell me exactly what I was looking at. Jasmine showed up on my porch 2 days later, arms crossed like she was cold, though it was 70 degrees outside. I almost didn't let her in. Some petty, wounded part of me wanted her to stand out there the way I'd stood outside that restaurant, unseen and unwanted. But I raised her, in every way that mattered for over 20 years, and old habits don't die just because a birthday goes wrong. Can we talk? She asked, and her voice had none of the ease I remembered from her childhood. Just nerves. I let her in. We sat at the same kitchen table where I'd cried on the phone to Bernice 2 nights before, though Jasmine didn't know that. I don't even know how to start, she said, twisting her hands. What happened at the restaurant? That wasn't supposed to happen like that. I need you to know I didn't plan any of it. I believe you, I said, and I meant it. Whatever else was happening in this family, I didn't think Jasmine had orchestrated her stepmother's humiliation on purpose. Mom just wanted closure, Jasmine said. That's what she told me. She said things have been unresolved for years, and with everything going on, she wanted us all in one room before... She stopped herself. Before what? Jasmine shook her head, frustrated at herself. I don't know exactly. She's been saying stuff like that a lot lately. Before things change. Before it's too late to fix things properly. I thought she meant, like, emotionally. Family stuff healing. I didn't think... She looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw real confusion in her face, not guilt. Was it about something else? I studied her carefully. This was a young woman being handed a story piece by piece, never the whole picture, just enough to keep her walking in the direction someone else wanted. I recognized the shape of it because I'd been handed my own version of that story for 31 years. I don't know yet, I told her, which was true, but I appreciate you telling me that. I just don't want you to think I chose them over you, Jasmine said, and her voice cracked in a way that reminded me of the 8-year-old who used to fall asleep against my shoulder during long car rides. You raised me too. That has to count for something. It does, I said. It always will. She left 20 minutes later, and I sat alone at that table for a long time after the door clicked shut behind her, turning her words over in my mind. Before things change. Before it's too late to fix things properly. A woman doesn't say things like that about old wounds. She says things like that about a clock. I thought about the letter in my camera roll, the deadline, the name Wendell Hargrove, spoken like nothing by a man who couldn't hold my eyes when he said it. I was done letting this family feed me feelings when what I actually needed were facts. I picked up my phone and searched until I found the number for an attorney Bernice had used years back during her own divorce. Someone thorough, someone who wouldn't flinch at a complicated situation. Gerald Winslow, the website said, retirement and estate matters. I dialed before I could talk myself out of it. And when the receptionist answered, I said the only thing that felt true anymore. I need to understand something before it's too late to stop it. Gerald Winslow's office smelled like old paper and stronger coffee than I usually drank, and he didn't smile when I sat down across from him. That, more than anything, told me I'd come to the right place. Bernice sent me, I said, sliding my phone across the desk, the photograph of the letter already pulled up. I don't know what I'm looking at, but I know it's not nothing. He read it once, quickly. Then he read it again, slower. And I watched something shift in his face, a small tightening around his eyes that he didn't try to hide. Where did you get this? He asked. My husband's dresser. Does he know you have it? No. I paused. What is it exactly? Before I answer that, I need to ask you something first. Gerald set the phone down. Where does your husband work? Private company or something government-run? County? State? Federal? Private. He's a regional manager for a logistics company. Has been for years. And this retirement account? It's through his employer, a 401k or something similar, not a pension through a public agency? 401k. Through the company, yes. Gerald nodded slowly, like that answer mattered more than I realized. That's important, Mrs. Price. It tells me which set of rules actually governs this account. If this were a public pension, we'd be dealing with state statute and the protections would look completely different. But an employer-sponsored 401k at a private company, that falls under federal law. Specifically, ERISA. Okay, I said. So what does that mean for me? It means the rules I'm about to explain actually apply here, cleanly, without complications. He tapped the printed date on the letter. Under federal law, for a plan like this, you are automatically his primary beneficiary, not his ex-wife, not his daughter. You, simply by being his legal spouse. Automatically, I repeated. Unless, Gerald said, and here his voice slowed down, deliberate. He obtained something specific from you, a written waiver, signed by you, notarized, giving up that right on the record. I felt my own pulse in my ears. I've never signed anything like that. Are you certain? Gerald, I would remember signing away my own future. He nodded slowly, like that answer settled something he'd already suspected. Then legally, right now, today, you are still protected. Whatever anyone else wants that letter to accomplish, they can't simply wish you out of that plan. There's a process, there's paperwork, and paperwork, he tapped the screen again, can be done wrong. Or done without me knowing, I said quietly. That's exactly what I'd want to check. Gerald's expression didn't soften, but something in his tone did. Mrs. Price, I want to be straight with you. A 10-day deadline tied to one individual account isn't a coincidence. Somebody is moving quickly, which usually means somebody is hoping to finish before anyone starts asking questions. I sat with that for a moment, feeling something cold settle where my humiliation had been living for days. This had never just been about a dinner. It had never just been about a husband too weak to say no to an ex-wife's demands. This was a plan. And plans have deadlines because someone, somewhere, is racing a clock. "What do I do?" I asked. Gerald folded his hands. "First, you let me start asking questions on your behalf, quietly. Second, you go home tonight, and you act like a woman who knows nothing at all." I nodded, already understanding that the version of myself who walked out of that restaurant a week ago wasn't the version who was going to walk back into my house tonight. I had 10 days. And now, finally, I had a reason to use every one of them. Gerald called me on a Tuesday morning while Marlon was still in the shower and got straight to it. "I want to file something on your behalf. A formal inquiry, asserting your spousal interest in the account. It puts you on record. It also means the plan office will know someone is watching." "Do it," I said, glancing toward the bathroom door, lowering my voice out of habit. Quietly. "It won't stay quiet forever," Gerald warned. "Once I file, the plan administrator has to acknowledge it. That means your husband's account gets flagged. He may hear about it before we're ready for him to." I told him to file it anyway. 10 days doesn't leave room for perfectly quiet. 3 days later, I found out exactly how loud quiet can get. Marlon came home early, which never happened, and he found me in the kitchen peeling potatoes like I hadn't rearranged my entire understanding of our marriage in the last week. He stood in the doorway a long moment before he spoke. "Did you contact someone about my retirement plan?" I kept peeling. "Where would you get an idea like that?" "Wendell called HR asking questions today. Said there's some kind of inquiry attached to my account." "Legal inquiry," he said. Marlon's voice had an edge I hadn't heard from him before. Not anger, exactly. Something closer to panic wearing anger's clothes. "You went and got a lawyer?" "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." He crossed the kitchen and set both hands on the counter, like he needed something solid to hold on to. "Tamika, whatever you think is happening, it isn't. That paperwork is nothing. I told you, it's a form. The company sends out. Routine." "You told me Wendell handles the paperwork?" I said evenly, still not looking up from the potatoes. Now Wendell's calling HR about a legal inquiry on a routine form. "Which one is it, Marlon?" His jaw worked for a moment before he answered. "I don't know what you think you found, or what somebody told you, but you're about to make a mess out of nothing." "Then it should be easy to clear up," I said. "Have Wendell send me the actual form. I'll sign whatever's needed, if it's really nothing." Marlon didn't answer right away, and that silence told me more than anything Gerald had explained to me all week. A man with nothing to hide doesn't hesitate before agreeing to sign paperwork in front of his wife. "It's not that simple," he finally said. "Then explain it to me." Simply. He straightened up, and for a moment I thought he might actually try. Instead, he shook his head, muttered something about not wanting to fight about a form, and walked out of the kitchen, footsteps heavy on the stairs, the guest room door closing a moment later with more force than it needed. I stood there with a half-peeled potato in my hand, my pulse steady despite everything, thinking about how a man who calls something nothing rarely gets that anxious, defending it. Gerald had told me to act like I knew nothing at all. I hadn't lied to Marlon tonight. I'd asked him plain questions and let his own answers do the damage. 10 days had become 7. And for the first time since the restaurant, I wasn't the only one in this house who couldn't sleep. Gerald asked me to come in person this time, which told me before he said a single word that whatever he'd found, he didn't want to say it over the phone. His office looked the same as before, same stacked files, same strong coffee smell, but his face had lost the careful neutrality from our first meeting. He had a folder in front of him, and his hand rested on it like he was deciding how much weight to hand me all at once. "The inquiry went through," he said. "As your husband's spouse, you have a legal right under the plan's rules to request specific documents relating to beneficiary status on the account. I filed that request formally, in writing, citing your standing directly. The office is required to respond to that, even if they weren't eager to. That itself tells me somebody there is already paying close attention to this account." "What did they say?" "There's an active beneficiary change request attached to your husband's plan. Filed recently. Still in process. Not finalized." He watched my face as he said it, like he was measuring how much I could hold before he added the next part. "Mrs. Price, I need you to understand what that means. Somebody isn't just thinking about doing this. Somebody already started." I felt my hands go cold in my lap. "Who filed it?" "The request came through Wendell Hargrove's office. The response I got was careful, guarded. They wouldn't confirm details beyond what your disclosure request legally entitled us to. But I did get one thing that concerns me. Wendell's office noted the file as pending completion, not rejected outright, even though the required spousal section is blank. That tells me somebody over there is willing to let this move forward without it, rather than sending it back the moment they saw the gap. Moving toward what? Toward whoever they're trying to name in your place," Gerald said plainly. "I can't confirm that person yet, but I don't think I need to tell you who you suspect." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. "Here's what worries me," Gerald continued. "A change like this requires the current spouse's waiver, signed, notarized, on file. It doesn't exist. And instead of that stopping this cold, somebody at that office is treating it as a detail to clean up later instead of a reason to halt the request." "Then we stop it," I said. "Now. Today." "No." Gerald's voice sharpened just slightly, enough to make me sit back. "Not yet. I know that's not what you want to hear. But if we move too soon, all we do is warn them to cover their tracks better. Right now, they think they're moving quietly. That's an advantage. The moment they realize we know, that advantage disappears." "How long do we wait?" "Until we have the actual paperwork in hand. Proof, not suspicion. A judge, an administrator, anyone official. They respond to documents, not stories." He closed the folder gently. "You've waited this long already. A few more days won't undo what you've built waiting quietly enough to get here." I sat with that a moment, feeling the strange, uncomfortable truth of it. Patience had never been the hard part of my marriage. Marlon had trained me well over 31 years to wait, to hope, to believe things were fine when some part of me had always known better. The difference now was that my waiting had a purpose. "Okay," I said finally. "We wait, but not blindly." "Not blindly," Gerald agreed. "I'll have more soon. I promise you that." I left his office with less comfort than I'd walked in with, and more certainty than I'd had in days. This wasn't a suspicion anymore, dressed up in bad feelings and half-answers. Somewhere, on paper, a plan was already moving without me, with someone willing to look past the one thing that should have stopped it cold. And for the first time, I knew exactly what I was racing against. Gerald's email came in at 8:14 in the morning, 4 words long. "Come in today. Now." I was in his office by 10, my coat still buttoned, my heart already ahead of whatever he was about to tell me. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "After I flagged your spousal interest last week," he said, "I formally requested a copy of the actual beneficiary designation on file. That's a document a spousal beneficiary is legally entitled to see once an objection's been raised. Their office was obligated to produce it. It came through this morning." He slid a single sheet of paper across the desk and turned it so I could read it right side up. "This is it," he said. "Copy of the actual beneficiary change form, filed with Wendell Hargrove's office 3 weeks ago." My eyes moved down the page the way they had with the letter, fast, then slow, catching pieces. Marlon's name, the account number, a new beneficiary designation, typed neatly into the field where my name should have been. Carla Simmons. Seeing it printed, official, typed in black and white, hit differently than suspecting it ever had. I set the paper down carefully, like it might do something if I held it too long. "There's more," Gerald said, and turned the page toward the second sheet, tapping a section near the bottom. "Spousal consent section. This is where your notarized waiver is supposed to go. Signature, notary seal, date." The section was blank, completely blank. No signature line filled in, no notary stamp. Nothing but empty white space where the law required my consent to exist before any of this could move forward. "They never got it," I said quietly. "They never got it," Gerald confirmed, "because you never gave it. This form, as it stands, is legally incomplete. It cannot be processed, not without your signature, notarized, on file." And their own office marked it pending completion, rather than rejecting it outright. Which is exactly why I was able to request it the moment your objection was on record. An open file is a file somebody has to account for. I sat back slowly, feeling something settle in my chest that wasn't quite relief and wasn't quite anger. It was steadier than both. "So they're trying to change my husband's beneficiary to his ex-wife," I said, testing the words out loud for the first time. "Without my knowledge, and without the one signature the law says they need. That's exactly what this document shows. Can they still do it? Before the deadline?" Gerald considered the question carefully. "Legally, no, not without your consent. But pending completion means it's still sitting active in their system. That's exactly the kind of gap somebody might be counting on." "Then we don't give them the gap," I said. "No," Gerald agreed. "We don't." I looked down at the form one more time, Carla's name typed in the space that belonged to me. The blank signature line beneath it like a door somebody had assumed would open on its own. 3 weeks. They'd had this moving. 3 weeks of Marlon sleeping down the hall, letting his phone buzz face down on the counter, telling me stories about surprise parties while this sat filed somewhere with my name erased from it. This wasn't hurt feelings anymore. This wasn't a marriage needing a hard conversation. This was documented, time-stamped, deliberate. And now, finally, it was mine to use. "What happens next?" I asked. Gerald folded his hands over the desk, steady as ever. "Next, we stop reacting to what they're doing, and we start making sure that when this deadline arrives, it's their plan that collapses, not yours." I nodded, folding the photograph of that blank signature line into memory, alongside everything else I now knew for certain. The waiting was over. The building was about to begin. Gerald prepared the objection himself, and he let me read every line before he sent it. "Once this goes in," he said, "it's official, on record. If anyone at that plan office was hoping to slide this through quietly, that stops today." "Good," I said. "Send it." He submitted it that afternoon, a formal objection asserting my spousal interest and flagging the missing notarized waiver, addressed directly to the plan administrator's office. No copy to Marlon. No copy to Wendell. Just a quiet line drawn in the only place that mattered, the actual record. "They'll have to respond to this," Gerald said. "Legally, they can't ignore a filed objection. But responses take time. It won't be instant, and it won't be loud. This is the kind of thing that moves through paperwork, not phone calls. So nothing happens today. Today, something already happened. Gerald said. You just can't see it yet. That's how this works. The fight isn't in a room anymore, it's in a file. I went home that evening carrying something I hadn't expected. A strange, careful calm. For the first time since the restaurant, I wasn't waiting on someone else's next move. I'd made one of my own. And nobody in that house even knew it yet. Marlon was quieter than usual over dinner, poking at his food more than eating it. And I let the silence sit between us without filling it. Whatever guilt was working on him, it wasn't mine to soothe anymore. It was Jasmine I couldn't stop thinking about. She'd texted me twice that week, both times short, both times strange, in a way I couldn't quite name at first. Hope you're doing okay. Nothing after it, no follow-up, no calls like the ones we used to have most Sundays. When I called her back, she picked up but kept the conversation thin. Work's been a lot. Talk soon. Love you. Bye. Gone before I could ask her anything real. It wasn't hostility. It was distance, careful and deliberate, like she was holding herself back from getting too close to something she didn't want to see clearly. I remembered her exact words from my kitchen table 2 weeks ago. Before things change. Before it's too late to fix things properly. I wondered, sitting there with my own uneaten dinner, whether Jasmine had learned something since then that she didn't know how to carry, or whether her mother had simply pulled her back in closer, tightening whatever narrative she'd been fed from the start. Either way, something had shifted in her, and I filed that feeling away carefully, the same way I'd filed away the envelope, the deadline, the blank signature line. Not every piece of this had to make sense yet. It only had to be remembered. I didn't call Jasmine again that night. I didn't push. Pushing had never gotten me anywhere with this family except further from the truth. I went to bed that night thinking about paperwork moving quietly through some office I'd never see, an objection sitting on record with my name attached to it, doing its slow work while the rest of my house slept without knowing anything had changed. Nothing was public. Nothing was resolved. But somewhere, finally, the record now knew what I knew. Jasmine showed up unannounced on a Thursday evening, and this time she didn't stand on the porch working up her nerve. She knocked once and stepped inside before I'd even fully opened the door. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need to say it before I lose my nerve." I led her to the kitchen table. The same one where she'd sat 2 weeks earlier, twisting her hands over half a truth. Tonight, her hands weren't twisting. They were flat on the table, pressed down like she was holding herself steady. "I was at Mom's house Sunday," she said. "I wasn't trying to listen. I was in the hallway, and her office door was cracked, and I heard her on the phone with someone. She said a name, Wendell. I didn't think anything of it at first. I kept my face still, my hands wrapped around a mug of tea I hadn't touched. Okay. She said." Jasmine stopped, swallowed, started again. She said, "We need to finish the paperwork before the deadline. If it slips past that date, it's over. It can't be redone." And then she said something about not wanting Tamika involved until it was already settled. The room stayed very quiet. I made sure my breathing didn't change, made sure my hands didn't tighten around that mug, even though everything in me wanted to react to hearing it confirmed, plainly, in my stepdaughter's voice instead of a lawyer's careful language. "I asked her what paperwork," Jasmine continued. "She got short with me, said it was grown folks' business, said I wouldn't understand. And that upset me, because she's never talked to me like that before, like I was in the way of something." "What did you think she meant?" I asked, keeping my voice even, curious instead of urgent. "I don't know exactly, but it didn't sound like closure anymore." Jasmine's eyes were wet now, though she wasn't crying, just holding it right at the edge. "It sounded like something being taken, and I kept thinking about you, standing there in that restaurant, smiling like you already knew something the rest of us didn't." I reached across the table and covered her hand with mine, careful, steady. "Thank you for telling me this. Is it true?" she asked. "Whatever she's doing. Is it about Dad's retirement?" I chose my next words, the way Gerald had taught me to choose all of them lately. Carefully, truthfully, without handing over more than she needed yet. "I think your mother is trying to change something that isn't hers to change," I said. "And I think you just gave me something important by telling me the truth." Jasmine nodded slowly, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "I love my mom, but I don't like being used to keep secrets from you. Not anymore." "You're not being used tonight," I told her. "Tonight, you told the truth. That's different." She left an hour later, lighter somehow, like she'd set down something heavy she'd been carrying without knowing its full weight. I stood at the door and watched her taillights disappear down the street, and for the first time since this began, I felt something other than anger toward this family. I felt the first real crack forming, not in me, but in the story Carla had built around herself. And cracks, I'd learned by now, only widen from here. Bernice called me before 8 in the morning, her voice carrying the particular energy of a woman who'd found something and couldn't wait to say it out loud. "You need to sit down," she said. "I'm sitting." "Remember Yvonne, from my old job? She waits tables at Roosters now, picking up shifts on weekends." Bernice paused, letting that land. "She pulled the reservation records for me. The one for your birthday dinner, the table where Marlon, Carla, and Jasmine were sitting." My stomach tightened before she even finished. "And that table was booked 3 weeks in advance, Tamika, under Carla's name. Not a walk-in, not a last-minute thing thrown together. 3 weeks." I sat with that for a moment, feeling something settle into place with a quiet, ugly click. A surprise party doesn't take 3 weeks of planning without the person it's for finding out. "That's not all," Bernice said. "Yvonne remembered the reservation because of the note attached to it. Special request, quiet corner table, away from the main dining room. Not exactly where you throw a birthday surprise for the person you're planning to surprise. That's where you sit when you don't want to be seen." I closed my eyes, letting the full shape of it settle. 3 weeks. A hidden corner. Marlon standing in that parking lot, breathless, insisting it had all gone wrong at the last minute, that it was supposed to be for me. It had never been for me. Not for one single day of those 3 weeks. I thanked Bernice, hung up, and sat at my kitchen table a long time before Marlon came downstairs that morning. When he did, I already had my phone in front of me, the message from Bernice with Yvonne's information still open on the screen. "We need to talk," I said. He must have heard something in my voice, because he sat down slowly across from me instead of brushing past toward the coffee pot like he usually did. "Tamika, 3 weeks," I said. "That reservation was made 3 weeks before my birthday, under Carla's name, a quiet table, away from everyone." I looked up at him. "That's not a surprise party gone wrong, Marlon. That's a plan that went exactly like somebody wanted it to, right up until I walked in." His face did something complicated, not quite denial, not quite confession. Somewhere in between, a man caught holding a lie he no longer had the strength to keep holding. "I didn't plan that dinner," he said quietly. "Carla did. He stopped, jaw working. "I went along with it because she said it was time to talk things through. About Jasmine, about old business. I didn't know how it would look until you walked in and I saw your face." "But you knew," I said. "Weeks before I ever asked you to have dinner with me, you already knew where you'd be that night, and who with. You just let me ask anyway. You let me make that reservation for one." He didn't answer. He didn't have an answer, not one that didn't confirm exactly what I already knew. I stood up from the table, my chair scraping against the floor louder than I meant it to. "I'm done asking you questions you already know the answers to," I said. "The next conversation we have, Marlon, I'm not asking anything. I'm telling you what I know." He watched me leave the kitchen, and for the first time since that night at Rooster's, he didn't chase after me with an explanation. There was nothing left to explain, only something left to face. I asked Marlon to sit down that evening, and this time I did the talking. "I know about the letter," I said. "The recertification notice, tucked under your watch box the night we got home from Rooster's. I know Wendell Hargrove's name because I read it myself, weeks ago." Marlon's face went still in the particular way of a man realizing the ground beneath him had already shifted before he noticed. "Tamika, I'm not finished." My voice stayed even, steady, the way I'd practiced in my head every night that week. "I know there's a form, a beneficiary change, filed with Wendell's office 3 weeks before my birthday. I know whose name is typed where mine should be." He didn't ask how. He just sat there, hands flat on the table, waiting for the rest, like a man watching weather roll in that he could no longer outrun. "Carla's," I said anyway, because he needed to hear me say it. "Carla Simmons, typed into the spousal beneficiary field of your retirement account, like I was something that could just be edited out." "I didn't file that," Marlon said quickly, the first real urgency I'd heard from him in weeks. "Tamika, I swear to you, I never touched that form. I knew the notice came. I knew Carla wanted." She kept saying it was time to settle things properly for Jasmine's sake, in case anything ever happened to me. I let her talk to Wendell about it because I didn't want the fight. I didn't want to tell you and watch you look at me the way you're looking at me right now. "So you knew," I said quietly. "You knew there was a plan to remove me, and you said nothing. For weeks." "I didn't think it would actually go anywhere," he said, and for the first time his voice cracked, something raw underneath the careful denial he'd been managing since the parking lot. "I told myself it was just talk. Carla talks about a lot of things she doesn't follow through on. I didn't know it had gotten as far as an actual form until—" He stopped himself. "Until what?" "Until Wendell called me last week," he admitted, asking why there was a legal inquiry attached to the account. That's when I understood this wasn't just talk anymore. "And you still said nothing to me?" I said. "Even then?" He didn't answer that. There was nothing left to say that wouldn't confirm exactly what silence had already told me. "Here's what I need you to understand," I said, leaning forward slightly, keeping my voice level even as my heart pounded harder than it had all conversation. "I never signed anything giving up my rights to that account. Not a waiver, not a form, nothing. Which means whatever Carla and Wendell think they've built over these last 3 weeks doesn't hold up. Not legally. Not against me." Marlon looked at me like he was seeing something he hadn't let himself consider before now. "What happens next?" "The deadline is in 3 days," I said. "And when it arrives, this is going to collapse. Not because I raised my voice in some restaurant, but because none of it was ever built to survive without my signature." He sat with that, silent, the guilt on his face finally matching the weight of what he'd let happen. "I loved you enough to build a whole life around this marriage," I said, standing up from the table. "I don't know yet what I owe you after this, but I know exactly what I owe myself for the next 3 days." I left him at that table, and for the first time, he didn't follow me out of the room. I woke up on deadline day, the way you wake up before a storm. That particular stillness in the air that isn't peace, just pressure waiting for somewhere to land. Gerald had warned me the response might not come today at all. "These things move on their own schedule," he'd said the week before. "The deadline matters to them, not necessarily to when they tell us anything." So I went through that morning bracing for silence, which somehow felt worse than bracing for bad news. By noon, nothing. I sat at my kitchen table with my phone face up beside me, the way Marlon used to keep his, and understood for the first time how exhausting that kind of watching really was. By 2, still nothing. I called Bernice just to hear another voice, and she talked to me about anything except the thing we were both thinking about. Bless her for that mercy. By 4, I'd convinced myself the day would pass without an answer at all, that Gerald's objection had been swallowed somewhere in an office I'd never see, that paperwork could simply lose itself in the machinery of people who didn't understand what today meant to me. I sat with that possibility, cold and unresolved, and started preparing myself for tomorrow instead. Gerald called at 4:47. "It's done," he said. No preamble, and something in his voice told me before the words fully landed. The plan administrator's office issued a formal rejection of the beneficiary change request today. Cited 2 things: your outstanding objection on record and the absence of a valid notarized spousal waiver. Without your signature, the request cannot proceed. As of this afternoon, it's void. I sat very still, phone pressed hard against my ear, waiting for the relief to arrive the way I'd imagined it would. It came slower than I expected, quiet instead of triumphant. "That's it?" I asked. "It's just over?" "Legally, yes. The account remains exactly as it was before any of this started. You're still the named beneficiary. Nothing changes hands, nothing gets signed away, because nothing ever met the legal requirement to move in the first place." "They had 3 weeks," I said. 3 weeks of planning, and it comes down to 1 blank line on a form. "That's usually how these things actually end," Gerald said. "Not with a dramatic reversal. With somebody forgetting that the law doesn't care how confident you are. It cares what's on the page." I thanked him, and after we hung up, I sat at that table a long while, letting the day settle over me differently than I'd expected. There was no confrontation to have, no argument to win. Somewhere in an office I would never see, a stamp had been placed on a rejected form, and that stamp had done more to protect me than any words I could have shouted in that restaurant 3 weeks ago. I thought about the smile I'd worn walking to that corner table, how certain I'd felt in that moment that I was choosing my own ending. I hadn't known yet how true that would turn out to be, not because of anything I said that night, but because of everything I'd done quietly in the weeks since. The deadline had come and gone, and for the first time since my birthday, I understood exactly who was still standing. Gerald called 2 days after the deadline passed, though he was careful to tell me this was only the beginning of it, not the end. "Wendell Hargrove is under internal review," he said, holding an incomplete beneficiary change open as pending completion, instead of rejecting it the moment the spousal waiver was missing. That's a serious compliance failure on his end. "These reviews take time, Mrs. Price. Weeks, maybe longer. But your objection, combined with the timeline, put Carla's involvement directly into the administrative record. It's documented now, officially, permanently. What does that mean for her? It means whatever she thought she was building quietly, she built it in writing," Gerald said. "That doesn't disappear, even if the process to sort it out takes a while." I thanked him, hung up, and let that settle without much ceremony. There was no satisfaction in it the way I might have imagined weeks ago, just a quiet closing of a door that had been left open far too long, even if the paperwork behind it would take its time catching up. It was almost 2 weeks later when Jasmine came to see me. She looked different standing on my porch this time. Not nervous, not bracing herself. Just tired. In the particular way of someone who'd finally set something heavy down. Compliance called Mom directly. she said, once we were sitting at the table again. Some review tied to Dad's account. She called me right after, upset, wanting me on her side before I heard it from anyone else. That's how I found out what she actually tried to do. She told me herself, trying to explain it away before I could ask. How did that go? Bad. Jasmine's jaw tightened. She still thinks she did nothing wrong, said it was always supposed to be hers eventually anyway, that I'd understand when I was older. She shook her head slowly. I don't understand. I don't think I want to. I didn't rush to fill the silence after that. Some things needed room to sit exactly as heavy as they were. I'm not asking you to choose between us, I said finally. I never wanted that. I know. Jasmine's eyes were wet again, though steadier this time than they'd been in my kitchen weeks ago. But I think I already have. A little. Not because I stopped loving her, because I finally saw what she was willing to do and who she was willing to hurt to get it. That doesn't have to be decided today, I told her. Whatever this looks like going forward, we don't have to figure all of it out in one conversation. She nodded, and for the first time in weeks, something between us felt less like a negotiation and more like the beginning of actual honesty. Not healed, not finished, just honest, which was more than I'd had from anyone in this family in a long time. Marlon and I hadn't spoken much since the calm conversation at that kitchen table. He still slept in the guest room, by his own choice, and some nights I heard him on the phone, voice low, though I no longer had the energy to wonder who he was talking to or what story he was telling them. He found me in the kitchen the evening after Jasmine's visit, leaning in the doorway the way he had that first week, except quieter now, smaller somehow. I know sorry doesn't undo any of it, he said. No, I agreed, it doesn't. I don't know what happens to us now. Neither do I said, and meant it. Not cold, just honest. I know what's happening with the account. I know Wendell's under review and Carla's name is on a record she can't erase. What happens to us, Marlon? That's not something a deadline decides. He didn't push for more than that, and I didn't offer it. We stood in that kitchen a while longer, two people who'd built 31 years together now facing the uncomfortable work of figuring out what, if anything, was still worth building. I filed for divorce on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after the deadline that was supposed to erase me from my own life instead confirmed exactly how much of it was still mine. Marlon didn't fight me on it. I think some part of him had been waiting for this decision since the night I set my ring down beside his plate, even if neither of us said it out loud until now. He asked, quietly, if there was anything he could do to change my mind. You already had 31 years to do that, I told him. I'm not angry anymore, Marlon. I'm just done waiting to see who you'll choose when it matters. He didn't argue. I think, finally, he understood. I kept the house. I kept the account that was never really in danger, once the law did what Carla and Wendell hoped it wouldn't. I kept Bernice, who'd stood beside me since before any of this started, and Gerald, who'd taught me that sometimes the loudest justice moves in complete silence, one filed document at a time. I kept Jasmine too, though what we have now looks different than it used to. She calls more than she used to, comes by on Sundays sometimes, still finding her footing between the mother who raised her and the mother who chose her. I don't rush that. Some things heal slowly on their own schedule, the same way that deadline moved on its own schedule, whether I was ready for it or not. Carla's name stayed on a record she can't take back, attached now to a compliance investigation instead of a wedding invitation to a party she was never supposed to be at. Wendell resigned a few months later, once the investigation reached its conclusion, though by then I'd stopped checking for updates. Some victories don't need to be watched to be real. They just need to have happened. I think about that night at Roosters often, though not the way I expected to. Not the humiliation of an empty chair where my stepdaughter should have sat, or the sting of watching my husband's hand rest easy on a table that wasn't mine. I think about the smile. I've turned that moment over so many times since, trying to understand where it came from. A woman standing at her own birthday dinner, alone, watching everyone she loved most sit comfortably without her, and somehow finding a smile instead of tears. I understand it now in a way I didn't that night. That smile wasn't performance, and it wasn't even really about them. It was the first moment in 31 years I stopped waiting for someone else to notice me and decided instead to notice myself, my own dignity, my own worth, standing upright in a room that had just tried to make me small. I didn't know, raising that glass, that I was already protected by a law I hadn't read yet, a signature I'd never signed away, a deadline that would end up working in my favor instead of against me. I only knew in that moment that I refused to let anyone's betrayal decide how I carried myself out of that room. 65 wasn't the year I lost my family. It was the year I found out exactly what I was capable of keeping, starting with myself.